And that's where I said, yeah, like I'll take on this case of a Jewish inmate, right? Even though I'm Muslim, he might hate me or be suspicious of me, but I want to take this. And once I got past that initial, like, he's going to hate me, he seemed okay with me. And then we kind of got to business and it felt like I could be useful.
Hey there, I'm Julie. Welcome to Uncomfy, a podcast about sticking with moments that challenge us. We share the stories of real people in moments that challenged their perspective. And instead of getting angry or shutting down, they stuck with the discomfort. They stayed curious and open, and they're glad they did. We hope these stories inspire you to stick with it too, because there is so much to gain. New empathy, deeper relationships, and more clarity about our own views. I'm so glad you're here. Now, let's get uncomfy. Here's a story about facing your own prejudice. I'm joined by Shima Baughman. She's a professor of criminal law at Brigham Young University, a leading expert on bail and sentencing. She even wrote a book called The Bail Book. And she's a distinguished fellow at the Wheatley Institute. You can find her on TikTok lately at Closer to Jesus Christ, where she frequently posts uplifting and inspiring messages about Jesus. Professor Baughman, welcome. Thanks for your time today.
Thank you. It's so nice to be with you.
You have a very interesting blend here of activities going on. You've got the criminal law stuff, and then you've got the uplifting Jesus stuff. Is there any connection there?
Yeah, it might seem like completely just out of left field, but actually when you get into criminal law, there's just so much about restorative justice. And those themes come back to the themes of justice and mercy that you think about with, a lot of faiths like Jesus Christ, with Christianity, even Judaism, Islam. I mean, there's so much there. So it ended up coming back full circle to religion for me as far as the criminal law angle. So it does come together, I promise.
I have so many questions. We will circle back to that because
Okay.
I do want to know more about what those connections are. But let's dig into your stick with it story first. And for that, we need to know just a little bit about your upbringing. What do we need to know?
I grew up in Iran. I was there till I was 7 and grew up Muslim. Most of the country's Muslim. In fact, most of the Jewish members of the country left during the revolution in 79. My mom was politically active. She wanted a democracy where you could have freedom of religion as well as other freedoms of speech. And otherwise, she, very long story short, became a political prisoner for her fighting against the government. I think I was 4 to 6-ish when she went to prison, but it was horrible. She was supposed to serve 10 years, but through some miraculous circumstances, she served 2.5 years of her sentence. But yeah, my sister and I were both young, and luckily family would take care of us. But yeah, it was a horrible time seeing her punished for basically standing up for things in America that you take for granted, right? Being able to speak against the government. She was raising money to try to move towards democracy when the Islamic regime took over. She didn't want that kind of repression. So that's why she went to prison. And what relates to our topic is there was tension between Iran and Israel. Jews didn't feel comfortable in Iran. The government was repressive towards them. And my family didn't have any personal negative feelings towards Jews. My parents, when we moved to the US, did have Jewish friends, but there was this very real tension and almost like fear of the unknown, a little bit of, you can call it bias, whatever it was, but definitely there were some negative feelings. I grew up in Iran, right? First grade, kindergarten, and we started the day saying death to America, death to Israel, death to Saddam Hussein. So that's just how I grew up, right? In the country that I lived in, where we had this repressive government that was very anti-Israel. And so I, saw that growing up. It was something that was fed to me as a child. So
Yeah.
that's where it came from. And then I came to America and said the Pledge of Allegiance, which was much different in the beginning of my days versus in Iran, where it was death to this and that. So
Yeah. So the stick with it moment of your story involves deciding to really kind of come face to face with the discomfort that you felt around Jews and around Judaism because of sort of where you had come from. How did that come about?
What happened was after law school, so I clerked for a year and then I went to work at Kirkland Ellis, a law firm in New York. And I had the opportunity to do a lot of pro bono work there, which was amazing. And so I did some criminal work. And when it was time to take my big case, there was a couple cases that were interesting to me. One was like a mafia case, which sounds more up my alley. But then the other one was this Hasidic Jewish inmate. He was a Hasidic, which is kind of a branch of Orthodox Judaism. And he wanted to sue because he wasn't able to pray in a place that was clean in his cell. It was at FCI Otisville, which is a prison in New York. And that's where I went from kind of maybe neutral feelings, kind of, I guess, initial baggage to neutral feelings to kind of like, I have kinship with this man, right? I'm gonna take his case on. I'm gonna spend hours for free. I'm gonna drive out an hour and a half from the city to FCI Otisville and meet with him and talk to him about his case and spent thousands of hours. Literally, we spent years on this case. And so it was that decision that was harder, right? Like, because I could have spent that time on lots of other issues, and I chose him. And that's where it was like a full circle moment for me, right?
So tell me a little more about that decision, though. I mean, what were you weighing, like the pros and cons? What did you think that you might, by going outside of your comfort zone even a little further, by committing to this individual that was related to so much cultural baggage that you brought with you, right? What were you hoping to gain from that, do you think?
Yeah. I think, I guess I was hoping to do the work that I hope to do as a lawyer, which was to help those who are underserved, who are not represented, who don't have the rights that they have. I've always had a soft place in my heart for prisoners because of my mom's experience being treated unfairly, didn't have a trial, lack of due process, all these things. So I've always advocated for criminal rights. But then I saw this man who simply just wanted to be able to pray. And I thought, this is such a worthwhile cause. Like, what a right that I take for granted that I can just pray anywhere and I don't have to pray in my toilet because he was praying in his toilet, right? That's where his cell is. There's no barrier. And in Islam, as well as in Judaism, there is a prohibition against praying in a toilet. It's unclean under the laws of Moses that, both Muslims and Jews respect. I just knew that this was an important thing. I just wanted this, even though I worried that he's going to think, oh, who is this Muslim woman turned Christian trying to represent me? She doesn't know me. And at first there was a little. So when I first met him.
What was that first meeting like?
Yeah, he was a little like surprised, like, what? Wait, you're Christian and you used to like, what are you doing here? A little bit. But he was grateful. He was so grateful. And we, initially it was rough, just kind of, I wasn't of his people. And so the Hasidic Jewish community in New York, they're very insular. So you'll see them out, but it's like, they don't really they have their own schools. They don't mingle tons with lots of other people. They have very strict codes that they live by. And so I'd seen them out. I grew up in upstate New York, but I never interacted with. So he was the first Hasidic Jewish person I'd ever even talked to. I had worked with Orthodox Jewish people in New York, but not Hasidic. And so anyway, it was my first time sitting with him. And so, for people that don't know, Hasidic Jews have, wear these hats that are characteristics of their faith. They have curls. They have a certain, type of dress that they wear. I just remember, feeling at first nervous. And once I got past that initial, like, he's going to hate me, he seemed okay with me. And then we kind of got to business and it felt like I could be useful. And I just felt so good. I'm like, every time I went in that prison, it's almost like it brought tears to my eyes because I knew I was doing the right thing. I just felt like this is exactly where I should be, right? I should be in prison. I should be visiting people that have no one else visiting them. I was, sometimes the only person to visit him in weeks. He has, had 11 kids and a wife, but his wife was so busy, she'd come, but, he didn't always have people visiting him. So it was good to be able to go see him and talk to him and really understand his experience inside the federal prison.
I would think that even choosing a pro bono case that involved a prisoner in a federal prison was, that was a courageous choice. On some level, it was a choice to kind of go really outside of your comfort zone and to spend so much time in prison when you could have chosen other cases, right, that weren't necessarily going to require you to drive an hour and sort of like sit face to face in a prison, for hours and hours and hours.
Totally, Julie. And what totally scared me at first, like, it still kind of freaks me out. I think about it. So, like, this is like weird, but you can't even wear certain bras to the prison. Like, if you have an underwire bra, you can't go in. Having those types of regulations, like the way they treat you kind of walking in, it's just kind of like intimidating, right? Mm-hmm. You feel like, gosh, I hope I don't get stuck in here. Like, it truly is horrible. And my poor inmate friend, his name's Mordecai Samet, he said he would have this the little sign that he created, he just wrote it above his bed, and it basically said, "Thanks be to God." So like every morning he said the way he survived that horrible environment was just reading the sign, like, "Thanks to God." And I'm like, how do you have gratitude when you are in a horrible place? I mean, it really was truly horrible for
Yeah.
anyone in prison, but he was remarkable.
What was he in prison for?
So he was in prison. He had a very lengthy white collar sentence for racketeering and fraud, but he had 27 years, which was probably the highest sentence I've ever seen for a white collar crime. But what he did was create a kind of fake lottery for the people in his community. And then he falsified some social security cards and some bank accounts and insurance things that he did with a group of men in his community, and to try to make money. And he said he wasn't trying to get rich. He just felt like, okay, this will be better than my community supporting me, and obviously regretted it after realizing what he'd done. And he actually paid it all back, which he told me right away. And he's been very clear that he paid I think he was in for 5.5 million. He paid every cent of it back, which is very unusual. Most people with white collar crime can't pay it back. They've spent it all on yachts and, sports cars, but he paid every dollar back.
Wow. And you weren't there to get him out on a wrongful conviction. You were there to help, to try to help him get the ability to pray in a different environment, right? To exercise his religious freedom.
Absolutely.
And was there any point during that case where you where you felt something change for you? Where a turning point where this right here, this is when my heart changed, or
yes.
When my perspective broadened.
Yes, I remember one time we were sitting there, and I was chatting with him about the stuff, and he was getting all these citations, and it felt like it was kind of coming at him because of his case, and he thought he was being punished. And
citations in prison, so he was getting citations from the
and he's like, I've never had, and it was we started laughing because he got citations because he hid broccoli under his bed, and we both were just dying laughing because that's what his citation was, is like he took a little extra broccoli at dinner because later if he was hungry he would eat it. And I'm like, how crazy that he's getting punished for just keeping a little broccoli. And he's like, everyone does it. We all keep food under our bed. That's because they close the dining hall and they're stuck in their rooms. So anyway, it was just like those moments where we both felt so human. I'm with you. Yes, like I love to have midnight snacks. We both do. And beyond that, kind of more on a more deep level, I felt like so much connection with him as far as our faith. The faith I came from both Christianity and Islam, which I was familiar with. I just remember thinking how beautiful it was that all he wanted to do is get up in the morning and pray in a group. That's what their, religion requires, and it's before sunrise. And the Muslims too wanted this, right? And he said, the Muslim men get up and they want to pray in a group, and we want to pray in a group. They won't let us out of our cells. That was kind of part of the litigation but I just remember thinking, yes, this is so beautiful that you want to pray. I mean, this is clearly helping you, right? And this is actually, to fast forward, the stuff I'm working on today is just, I do think, having Mordecai Samet pray in his cell and do all these religious activities would help him, right, in realizing his wrongs and kind of becoming a better person through being in prison. I think very much of our prison system is not focused on rehabilitation, but what is some of the religious programming that's not technically part of Bureau of Prisons, but it actually does end up working.
So how did it turn out? Was he able to get the right to come out of his cell and pray with the other Jewish individuals?
Yes. So the government did, after 2 years, end up accommodating him.
Is he still in prison?
He's actually not. So he got out in 2020 because of the First Step Act that allowed older inmates to be able to release. There was some hiccups about it because he was Israeli. And so anyway, but he did get released and very much speaks vehemently against crime. He's does all these talks in his community, like, it's not worth it. Don't break the law. Don't steal. Don't think you're better. And so I really appreciate the message that he now brings with his experience. And I think he served 20 years in prison.
So Shima, thank you for sharing that story. How did that experience and the choices that you made to really get uncomfortable and to go into, to kind of face your prejudice and really look for kinship across these religious and cultural barriers? How has that affected you, affected other aspects of your career?
I mean, massively. I think, career-wise and kind of personally, I think I have really gained this like love for all faiths. Last year, I was able to go to Jerusalem, and one of the most powerful spiritual experiences I've ever had in my life was there, where I went to the Wailing Wall, the most holy site for the Jews, anywhere. It's so sacred. I remember as I'm walking up, the call to prayer comes. The Muslim call to prayer. I happened to be there in one of those times that it goes, and I'm hearing this call to prayer walking up to the Wailing Wall, and so appreciative of kind of temples, and in my Christian faith, I believe in temples, and so it all just came together, and I just felt this love, like God loves all of His children, and He loves all of us to worship, and I just felt this like just I don't know, this wholeness about all of it. I think that kinship, like I was talking about earlier, it really came full circle. So right in that spot where the Solomon's Temple is the Dome of the Rock, one of the most holy sites for Muslims, as well as the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, where people believe Christ was crucified, all within a kilometer. And I don't think that's a coincidence. I just think God loves all of His children, and He wants all of us to worship Him and be united. And so anyway, I felt this huge unity, and I love the Jewish faith. I love reading the Old Testament, the Law of Moses. I study kind of those types of things along with some of the other types of holy faiths. I'm studying a lot of that now with my new job with Wheatley too, but it's I just have this holy envy for lots of faiths.
You mentioned a couple of times that you were Muslim, obviously, when you were growing up in Iran, but then around 7, when you came to the United States, you also converted to Christianity?
Yes. So it's that's actually why we ended up staying in America. So we ended up coming to America for my dad to do a research position at UCLA. He was a neurosurgeon in Iran. He just finished his residency, so he's doing a 1-year research position. And during that position, there was a nurse at UCLA who was a Persian convert to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and she felt prompted a couple times to talk to him about Christianity, about Jesus, and she said, kind of ignored it twice. And then she says the third time she just couldn't ignore it. She went up to him and said, "Hey, would you and your family like to come to my Christmas party?" And we went, and from that experience, my mom ended up meeting with the missionaries, and then decided to join the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And that's why we stayed, because she knew if she converted from Islam and went back to Iran, they would kill her. So I'm grateful for that conversion, for that changed my life on a spiritual level, as well as kind of temporarily we would have been going back to a war-torn Iran rather than remaining in the United States.
And so today you have this position as a distinguished fellow at the Wheatley Institute, which is also at Brigham Young University, where you teach law, but has a religious focus. The Wheatley Institute does. And then, like I mentioned, you're really active on Instagram and on TikTok, at Closer to Jesus Christ on TikTok, and on Instagram you're Shima Baughman. But lots of messages about Jesus and about the power of faith. I mean, do you feel like you're just like two people? Like you teach about bail and criminal law, and then you're also like on Instagram talking about God. Does it ever feel like it's two separate sides of you?
Oh, I love that question. No, and it's funny because you might think so, but I started to realize, right? I was an expert in bail. I started looking at bail in 2008, wrote a book in 2017, the bail book. And after that point, I started to see that policy was temporary. So all these amazing progress points that we'd seen on bail, lots of statutes, lots of bail reform throughout the country. But I did notice in 2020, we saw a spike in crime. And so all these bail reforms, people were backtracking and clawing back bail reforms. But what I started noticing was, policy was temporary, and it was changed by the whim of a legislature. But I did start noticing at that time, and this was through secular books my friends had written and other things I'd seen, but I saw, judges who I'd spoken to about empirical data and how it can improve bail, ignore my data, but then have mercy when they'd see a defendant come to court with members of their church congregation with them. They were somehow touched and gave lower bail amounts to those people. So I started to see there was something going on, and that faith really did have impacts in criminal justice, more powerful and long-lasting impacts than the policy work and the empirical work that I was doing. But in general, the big arc of my career so far in criminal justice has been looking at how do we reduce incarceration rates? How do we keep America safe? How do we reduce violent crime? How do we, reduce bias to the extent it exists? So I'm, looking at all of these things, and I think where the religion piece fits in is kind of figuring out a solution to getting people off of crime, right? I think it's more kind of like, how do we actually get people to stop wanting to commit crime? and moving to a different life. And that's where I've seen so many countless examples of individuals who transformed their lives due to finding some faith, a deeper understanding of your purpose. And because they find that purpose, they're willing to now change their lives. Before they have that, they're not. And so I think when I'm dealing with bail and a policy angle, I think I was just kind of not getting to the root, right? It's like, yes, it's good if we release people before trial and they meet with their lawyers and they probably get a fair shake and they get to keep their job. And I still think that's a great thing. But at the same time, is that going to solve the deeper underlying problem of them wanting to commit crimes? Not necessarily. And so that's what I'm trying to get at now with this new work.
Shima Baughman is a professor of law, criminal law at Brigham Young University, a distinguished fellow at the Wheatley Institute, author of The Bail Book, a comprehensive look at bail in America's criminal justice system. And you can find her talking about faith and Christ on TikTok at Closer to Jesus Christ. Shima, thank you so much for sharing your story with us today.
Thanks, Julie.
Thanks for getting uncomfy with us today. It's been great having you. Shima's story actually reminds me how rarely I spend time with people who have backgrounds that are really, really different from my own, and how much more I could learn if I sought that out more often. Have you chosen to stay uncomfy recently when confronted by a perspective or a situation that challenged you? How did you manage to stay open and curious when your instinct was to bail out or to get defensive? Drop a line to uncomfy@byu.edu. We might even have you on the show to tell your story. And if you'd like some practice staying open and curious about challenging views, have a listen to my other podcast. It's called Top of Mind. And recently we've explored what it means to be white in America and why we're struggling as a society to end both the opioid and obesity epidemics. Those are just two examples of episodes recently. We look for perspectives that will challenge us to feel new empathy and get more clarity about our own views. So it's great practice. You can look for Top of Mind on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you usually listen. Uncomfy is a BYU radio podcast. Samuel Benson produces it, and the team includes James Hoops, Sam Payne, Kelsey Ney, and Brandon Lewis. I'm Julie Rose. I can't wait to get uncomfy with you again next week.